Hello, and welcome to an introduction to resilience. My name is Dr. Sven Hansen. I'm the founder of the Resilience Institute. We're a B Corp certified small team working with business primarily, but also with many professions, with schools, and with elite sport. My own background is I trained as a doctor after some time in special forces, practiced in sports medicine for a decade, and then asked the question, so we seem to be achieving fantastic results with athletes, with teams. Could we translate some of what sport is doing into the world of business and the world of professional activity? And that has been our journey. We've been going some 25 years, have a rich research database, and our effort is to help people be more resilient. Resilient people contribute to a resilient organization. And resilient organizations will contribute to a resilient planet. So our journey today is firstly to define resilience, understand how that relates to well-being, mental health, and many other descriptors used today, to understand that within healthcare there are some real challenges facing us as organizations, but more specifically you as professionals. To know what the benefits are of resilience training in the business and professional world, to understand which skills you as a healthcare professional might like to consider and execute on. It is a journey that has both individual and organizational responsibility. We cannot push it all to the organization to fix our problems, and organizations cannot expect people in a chaotic environment to maintain resilience on their own. And finally, just a reflection on how some of this work, some of these ideas, some of these practices may help you to help your patients. Our principles of action, firstly, keep it evidence-based. We try to build things that are based on good science, peer-reviewed research, and agreed in multi-center studies. Secondly, integral, in that we believe the physical being, the emotional being, and the mental being are integrated as human beings, and we need to know how to work with all of those elements of our so-called modern tool set. And finally, we like it to be practical. So I'm going to focus some of the session on some of the practices we find most helpful. So let's start with a broad view. Recent work looking at deaths by risk factor. We see things like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, obesity, cholesterol, and a range of pollutants. These are preventable. What drove me into this world is understanding that we can prevent disease. And secondly, that by using similar principles, we can actually improve well-being. Now, the world is tricky today. So this is, for example, is from Jean Tweney's work, looking at US 12th graders and their adult activities. And as you can see, there's been a massive, significant, approximately 50% drop-off in adult-like activities. Trying alcohol, driver's license, working for pay, sex, and dating in the real world. These are huge drops, and they will bring huge changes in healthcare. Secondly, we know that mental health is a huge issue. And much has been written on this. I do recommend Jonathan Haidt's work, The Anxious Generation, as a great way to understand how we've perhaps misread the safety and the risk tolerance that we need to consider both in the real world and in the online world. And as we know, it is not just diagnosis, it is consequences. This one, for example, self-harm hospitalization rate, where I did my training and most of my work in New Zealand, one of the worst in terms of young women. So today we are inclined to look for a magic pill. What I'm going to share with you today is an alternative. Yes, there are magic pills, and many of our treatments do absolutely fabulous things. Where medicine is today is heroic, fantastic. All right? But I think we've got to be careful of belief. As Bertrand Russell said, it's not the will to believe, but the will to find out that matters. And for example, last week in The Economist, 25th October 2024, a number of articles reviewing the impact of Ozempic and other drugs on our healthcare. It is certainly being pushed as a panacea. So rather than the practices of resilience like exercise, sleep, nutrition, relaxation, we are pushing this idea of a magic pill as much as possible. And it seems to work, and we need to respect that. So whether it's diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, addiction, and aging, all of these have positive impacts. And as clinicians, we need to keep that in mind. But much of modern life is triggering a kind of dis-evolution, according to Daniel Lieberman at Harvard. So for example, the change in body weight, in diabetes, inflammation, cardiovascular disease, anxiety, depression, our receding chins, the consequent breathing disorders and teeth disorders, collapsed feet, joints, short-sightedness, now kind of expected, sleep disruptions, sedentariness, and loneliness. These are risks that are not helping us to evolve in positive ways. In fact, we may be dis-evolving, according to Lieberman. Now, it is a good idea to have a definition of resilience. We all hear different things. Our own definition, and simply recommend you consider this, is that it begins with the journey of flow. As healthcare professionals, we know that when we bring our skills to a significant challenge, we enter a state where we are focused, absorbed, and graceful in the activity. It is in those moments of flow that we're the best version of ourselves. That's the goal. But if you stretch yourself to flow, you're going to make mistakes. Things will go wrong. Demand will increase. So from flow, we need to consider this concept of bounce. And note, we don't term bounce back. Yes, an aircraft wing can bounce back. But as a human, if you exercise a muscle, work your emotions, concentrate your mind, there is growth. So in many ways, instead of talking about post-traumatic stress, in resilience we term it post-traumatic growth. Something that happens 55 to 77% of the time. From bounce, we move to the idea of grow. How can you dial into the needs of your physical, your emotional, and your mental world? And finally, and what really matters, is our ability to connect. To connect with ourselves, connect with others, and to connect with our environment. And each of us need different elements of this resilience. It is a rhythm, it is a cycle. Sometimes you can focus on flow, sometimes on bounce. Sometimes you need to go back to the drawing board and work on your mental skills. And sometimes it's relationships and emotional intelligence. We find it very hard to separate these elements. We use a more complex model. This is available on our website for those of you who want to go deeper. In essence, you and I know there are times you wake up and you think, yes, I love my life. You're at the top of this idea of altitude, or the top of the spiral. It is a joy to be awake, to be on your way to work, to be connected with your family. At other days, we wake up and we feel like death warmed up, and all we want to do is climb back under the pillow. We're down at the bottom. Our altitude is low. It feels awful. Now, we've tried to take this idea, which you'll find in the Kabbalah, you'll find it in ancient Indian, Chinese, and Tibetan wisdoms. This concept, think about the Four Noble Truths: to know suffering, to establish calm, to be able to grow your capabilities, and to connect with a greater world. Same idea, we've just tried to put Western medical language into this. And as you can see, on the top side, being calm, steady, secure is the base. Taking care of your body so that you can use your emotions more skillfully. If the emotions are harnessed, regulated, mastered, our mind works better. And it's through that we achieve flow. And sometimes resilience fails. And we need to know those warning signs so we don't wake up at the bottom with a diagnosis of depression. We can actually catch ourselves as we slip down and know what little simple tactics we can do. And we're going to talk about a number of these as we move through this material. To give you an idea, this is one example. We have data for hundreds of thousands of people. This is a small team of 25 executives. And you can see in their pre-assessment, they've changed their resilience ratio. Now, to give you a rough idea, we measure resilience by the number of strengths divided by risks. A resilience ratio of 2 is where life becomes sustainable and effective. Now, this group, over the period of 6 months of training, was able to move their resilience from an average of about 1.7 up to an average of 2.2. That's a positive change. And that's how we like to work. And what we do note, and for your reflection, just be aware that in healthcare, the resilience ratio is one of the lowest of the professional groups we work with. What do we achieve? This is a list, a little bit of variation so you get an idea, but a large sample. So contemplative practices, fitness, relaxation, health awareness, getting a health check, sleep quality, those daily practices are the big gains we get in a typical 6-week to 6-month program. A really useful idea to approach this is to think what really matters. Now, for each of us, that's different. But when we took large amounts of data, this was 2022 data, 10,000 odd people, and we asked the question, if you were in the top decile of resilience scores, how did you answer the questions as compared to someone who's in the bottom decile? And what we see is that they're ranked in terms of that difference. Fulfillment is the number one factor that distinguishes someone who's living a resilient life as compared to someone who is not. 92 to 16% of ticking that question strongly agree or agree. Sleep quality 2, bounce, focus, relaxation, and purpose. So let's take a quick run through how might we approach these very practical, very simple, but quite difficult to execute skills. So we think of flow, as I said, when you apply your skills to a meaningful challenge. We notice some common themes. Thinking, that noise in your head, the worry, the rumination, it drops away. Time can distort. A morning can disappear. You're so absorbed, and you didn't notice that. In flow, you're graceful. After flow, there's a rich sense of fulfillment and joy. Finding flow achieves many goals, and I think it's a good starting point. The originator of the flow idea was Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. This is now 45 years old, and he simply ranked states of being using challenge on the vertical and skill on the horizontal axis. Flow is that state where high skill meets high challenge. Clearly, as professionals, there are times we need to do heroic work. We're on the pointy end. But most of the time in our work, caring for patients, organizing healthcare systems, is in the lower part of flow. As our skills mismatch, we can go one of either ways. One is towards more arousal, agitation, noise, pressure, and into anxiety and even worry. The other way is from flow with more skill, less sense of challenge, into a state of control and even relaxation. And you can think, where would a patient want to experience you? In control, relaxation, arousal, anxiety, it's clear. Where we are as professionals matters to our patients. In healthcare, and for many of you, you'll be leaders, you'll be leading teams, you'll be leading people and families. There are a set of skills that aren't immediately obvious. It's not the skill of surgery or medicine or psychiatry. It's a skill of self-care. Can you rejuvenate yourself every day to bring that best version of yourself into your patient care? Do you understand your flow cycle? Can you adjust the challenge, the skill to meet your patients in the right place? Can you be present physically, emotionally, mentally? Do we have empathy for the physical experience, the emotions, and the mental state of our patients? And can we influence them and the team around them? Those are skills we work with in our more advanced programs. Second one was sleep. Now, many of you know more than enough about sleep. It's a vast topic which has grown considerably in the last 2 decades. Our approach to sleep is not to dictate to people, you must do this, but rather to encourage questions. 3 questions. The first, timing and rhythm. Do you know the optimal time for you to fall asleep and to wake up? Second, length. Are you someone who needs 7 hours, 22 minutes, like myself, or do you need 8 hours? There is a range. Most professionals now agree it's somewhere between 6.5 and 8. Less than 6.5 hours, you incur risk and damage. More than 8 hours sleep, you start to incur problems as well. And the final question is, can you secure quality? Now, we know about the sleep one. We recommend for many people a simple tracking device for a short period of time can be a really helpful way to find what your sleep need is. Perhaps of more interest to many at the moment is this concept of clock and timing, or the circadian rhythm. So as humans, we're very functional during the day, but really at night we are food for the rest of nature. We function brilliantly, and then we start to cool down quite significantly. And then as the day progresses, we warm up again. Now, that circadian clock varies. Some of us are on the lark side, some of us on the owl side with a slightly longer clock. But the question remains consistent. The first one is there an optimal time for you to wake up? And can you hold that steady? Because we know now that if you can wake up at a good time for yourself, get the exposure to blue light, you set your day up and you synchronize your clock. That is your primary Zeitgeber. But on the other side, if we know that we need to be asleep at, say, 10, what are we doing to cool down? Are we changing the light from blue light to yellow light? Are we reducing temperature? Are we withdrawing from our screens, spending some time to talk, to read, to take the dog for a walk? These calming and cooling activities prepare ourselves for the journey into sleep. And that brings us to a simple understanding, and of course you know this, right? But do you do it is the question we keep finding people struggle with. As we fall asleep, if we're well prepared, we'll drop into that ultradian rhythm that gives us our deep or slow wave sleep, and then through the latter parts of the night we'll get more REM or dream sleep. And we know there are different benefits for both. We need both, and we need enough. Now, if we go to bed too late, as many of our teenagers do, some missing nearly 2 hours of the sleep they need, the body, because it's young, will prioritize deep sleep. And that means your dream sleep gets compressed. Now, we know dream sleep is complex. We've got much to learn, but it is definitely involved in our learning and memory. It is involved in our emotional intelligence, our creativity, and our ability to recover from trauma. Some sleep experts believe it is the compression of dream sleep that is leading to much of our mental health challenges. Simple question: timing, sleep need, and quality. And we find as people look at this, they make small adjustments, and those small adjustments can make a big difference. Third, bounce. So the athletes need to know you can't win every game. You're going to lose. And the question is, how quickly can you understand that and bounce? There are two parts to bounce. The first is, do you know where you are? Because if you know where you are, you can make the change. All too often in my early medical career, doing executive medicals, what we discovered is many professionals came into the clinic already showing symptoms of depression, and they had no idea they'd got there. And when you showed them what had happened, it's like, oh wow, okay, I can see that now. And when they had that insight, it was generally a very positive trigger for taking constructive action. So effective that around about 1997, I stopped using antidepressants. So what do we learn over that time? So the failure of resilience begins really in the mind, because we have a very small prefrontal cortex. It's very energy demanding. It rapidly runs out of oxygen, glucose, blood. And of course, the body is maintaining this overloaded prefrontal cortex and balancing its needs against your liver and your heart and your skin and your digestion. And if there's too much going to the brain, the body will simply pull the plug. 1 minute you're there, and the next minute you're in your fairies, in your dreams, gone, disengaged. And I think as professionals, we often fail to understand how common this is. At Harvard, they suggest it's around 46% of the time a professional is disengaged. If you happen to be working with a patient at the time, problem. We have some data on this. This is from judges and parole granting. Every judge in this study committed to the idea that it didn't matter who you were, what you'd done, or when you came to see them, you would get a fair parole hearing. But in fact, reality over 1,100 hours of judge survey was that it is in your interest, if you're going for parole, to see the judge first thing in the morning or possibly after morning tea. If you see the judge after lunch, you're probably going back to jail. And this is the example. Our brains need to be cared for. They're not computers. They're rhythmic in their movement between what we call task-positive activity and the default mode network. We need to respect it. Most of us professionals are under so much pressure, it's task-positive, endlessly, without enough time to rejuvenate and reboot. Now, obviously, sleep matters. This matches blood glucose. Exercise matters. Even posture matters significantly. Now, if we go below there, you have to ask the question, if you're disengaged, what's driving your life? What's taking over? And it is ancient emotions, things that evolved with early reptiles. In effect, the flight, as a snake will take away if you come towards it. If you block that snake, it'll move to fight. And if you threaten that snake and bully it, it's going to roll over into what we call death feigning. Now, we're not snakes. We have a much more complex biology and much more complex neurobiology. And it's important to understand that we want to give us lots of room, but in general, the same rules hold. And polyvagal theory has really shown this to be true. So when there's doubt, when you're disengaged, an avoidance reaction takes over. You want to get away from the threat. It's normal. If we don't have that, we've got a problem. Right? But if it sticks around, we get stuck into threat, fear, worry, and that can become an anxiety condition. Some of us are more likely to drop into defense. We become frustrated, resentful of those around us, of our organizations, of politics. Right? And that can lead to anger, and we know where that can take us. And then for many, if you cannot fight back, you will collapse. You'll submit, if you like, the basis of the vasovagal reaction, where you will lose consciousness, blood pressure drops. Over time, you become disappointed, sad, and fatigued. Now, that spiral is not perfect, of course. It can happen in a flash with some bad news, or it can take 2 years to slowly spiral down. Now, we are not big fans of the term burnout. I think it's very meaningful personally, but in terms of a diagnosis to give someone hope, I think this is much better. We know that burnout is an organizational syndrome, not a clinical diagnosis, and many would say when I feel burnout, it may be the beginnings of depression, right at the bottom of the spiral. And of course, here we have mental illness. In overload, that's our stress world, our mania, disengage, attention, hyperactivity disorders, avoid anxiety, defend hostility, and collapse depression. So it is kind of logical, but I think each of us need to take this language and change it to fit what we experience. Now, the power of seeing this, both in yourself as a professional and as a clinician, is that you know what's required. And that's where this concept of bounce comes up. So moving from snake brain, fight, flight, fight, and freeze, we can move to a more human brain, which is conscious. And we use those simple terms I'm sure you've heard before. Name it, tame it, and reframe it. In collapse, and as professionals, you know the data on healthcare professionals, it's not great. Sometimes we need to be humble, courageous, and get help. Connect with someone. The movement to address collapse is towards life, towards people. And we need help to do that because you feel withdrawn, you're isolated, in that case. There are many ways to treat it. Medication may be part of it, but there are so many options today. Defend is quite different. Instead of going back in, that's time to pull back, to relax, to quieten, to soften, to listen, to be able to see the perspective of another person. And you can then use your anger as more of a focusing technique, a connecting technique to resolve the problem. You've named it, I'm angry. You've tamed it, taking a bit of time, maybe using your breathing, and you've reframed that anger into a sense of tolerance, perhaps kindness, or simply respect. And in avoid, we need to move into the relaxation cycle. So classic polyvagal theory, when we're activated, reactive in the flight, fight, and freeze mode, we need to find calm. We need to reactivate that new vagus and bring back heart rate variability. Now that may be through sleep, relaxation techniques, or just simple breathing techniques. And then I guess as professionals, each one of us must ask the question, so what is my ideal rhythm? How long can I focus on a patient? What sort of break do I need between patients? How do I take that break? And understanding that kind of task positive on, default mode, relaxed rhythm that works for you to start to organize your day and your team to be able to be on the job, but also to have enough time before you disengage to rest, rejuvenate, and come back strong. Now, these are tactics. People like to think of bounce as a strategy. It's not a strategy. It is simply knowing, here's where I am, this is what I need to do. For me, I'm an anxious person. It is interesting to ask, are you more likely to go to anxiety, like me, or get angry, or maybe feel disappointed and collapse, lose energy? If you can name it, you've begun to tame it. The brain moves back into prefrontal mode. You are conscious. Things calm down. And then the reframe, for me and avoid at least, is be curious. Okay, Sven, you can feel your heart, a little anxious, feeling that. Be curious. What's happening in you? What's happening in this relationship? What's happening in your environment? As soon as I feel that curiosity, the fear drifts away. Same with anger, same with sadness. All right, and just useful on the other side of the spectrum in terms of risks. And this makes the point that worry is the single biggest difference between the top decile, who tend to limit their worry, and the bottom decile, where it's pretty much an experience of life. And we see this also in rumination, a huge gap. And I guess, that is our sense of focus training. It's a more subtle technique. You need to be calm, you need to be in the right place, but being able to notice your thoughts. Am I in the future worrying in a repetitive loop? Am I ruminating about something in the past in a repetitive loop? How do I get to the present? That simple step of being able to check your thinking, quiet it, and bring yourself fully back to the present is a huge step in mental well-being. Then we need to build our capacity. Just like a muscle, you can focus. Like the meditator is the Olympic champion of the brain. They can focus for 30 minutes, whereas the average adult today is at 3 minutes. The average teenager today is at 18 seconds. And then as a clinician, we need to be able to go into the detail and then sometimes step back and see the bigger picture. What's going on in the waiting room, what's going on in the long-term journey of this patient, and that ability to balance detailed focus with broad situation awareness is important. And then, of course, you can move to things like CBT, which is really a way of changing your thinking, noticing what you're saying, challenging it, adjusting it. Everything bad happens, always happens to me? Well, everything, not really everything. This bad thing happened to me. And actually, this happens to all kinds of people. And, this is just 1 in 10 years. Now, straight away, I've taken a repetitive looping rumination and restructured it or reframed it into a more constructive version. Highly recommend Johan Hari's book on stolen focus. This is a beautiful exploration of the concept of how we can protect our attention in this crazy modern world. All right, maybe the final practical one is just understanding this concept of polyvagal safety. This is from Professor Stephen Porges. He's a neurophysiologist. And simply making the point, we have understood a new level of the vagus nerve. We always knew it as rest, digest. Perhaps in the old vagus nerve is the activator of a vasovagal attack. But what we've discovered is some of the fibers in the vagus nerve, the longest nerve in your body, are trainable. This new vagus nerve can become myelinated, and that changes the game tremendously. Simply slowing your breath to a gentle inhale, low and slow, and a long exhale. If that exhale is a little longer than the inhale, let's say 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, which you can do in a meeting, you can do in a conversation, as that breathing becomes more diaphragmatic, you're massaging the heart through the pericardium. It changes your respiratory sinus arrhythmia or heart rate variability. That is an example of the vagus nerve acting. We feel calmer. Inflammation drops. We are now more in control of our thoughts and our emotions. And most importantly, as this new vagal nerve activates, our empathy circuits open to other people. So calm, control, connect. There are many ways to do it. We try not, but just to give you an example, our clients do it in very many different ways. Lots would simply use a long exhale, all the way out. Guess what people say to us? Take a deep breath, Sven. Wrong. As I take a deep breath, my heart accelerates. I stop that heart rate variability. I make myself potentially more anxious. The exhale is the key. If you can do that roughly 8 minutes a day, sitting 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, a kind of meditation, sitting in the garden, walking down the beach, you will start to train that vagus nerve. Over a year or two, you get structural changes in the nerve, in the brain, in your attention, in your sleep quality. And clearly the contemplative practices have done this for a long time. Many people are very excited by ice water, ice baths and swimming underwater. That has become very popular. Massage works, gargling works, laughter works. And even something simple like taping, provided you don't have snoring, your mouth shut, improves the function of your nasal turbinates, the filtering, the humidification, and the warming of air. With that, you get higher heart rate variability at night. Quality of sleep is better. We like to make it practical. So simple routine. Lengthen your spine, light and long. Gentle inhale just to bring your attention into the body, and then a long, slow exhale with a bit of a pause. Repeat as needed. Being able to have this tactic is a powerful way to build your bounce, to build your focus, to be able to get to sleep on a rocky night. And you don't have to become a crazy. All right, so in summary, I guess as a professional, in a very challenging environment, which I think is only likely to become more challenging, purpose, fulfillment, and flow is kind of the first piece. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And understanding that long-term goal. With that, we can tolerate so much more. Sleep quality. We're not great at that. By professionalizing your sleep disciplines or sleep hygiene, you improve yourself physically, emotionally, and mentally. Simply 20 minutes of sleep disruption is something that your employees, your staff, your team, your patients will notice. Learn how to bounce forward fast. Use pain as a stimulus for growth. Build your focus. Build relaxation into each day. And the final idea, and I think it's a curious one, this came out in August 2022 in the JAMA Psychiatry, and it was the first study I've seen on rhythm. And they called it rhythm phenotypes, in other words, what we actually do. And what they did here was to look at depression scores in the PHQ-9 and cognitive performance on the PMCI. And what they discovered here is people who got up earlier with robust exercise patterns had significantly less depression symptoms, significantly less cognitive impairment. All right, interesting. And as we move into less activity, into weak rhythm in our wake-up times, or even waking up late, sleeping in the weekends, you see the risk of depression and of cognitive performance problems or mild cognitive impairment increases quite markedly. And of course, nature has rhythms. It always has. Just like our circadian rhythm, our heart rate variability, our blood pressure, everything is rhythmic. And that's something I think we need to build as professionals. As an example of heart rate variability, moving from chaotic to more coherent. That person simply used the 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. So I guess to close this is to leave you with a challenge. What might be some of your non-negotiables? You've certainly worked out what works for you. I know for me, being really strict on sleep is a game changer. I know the value of 30 minutes of exercise. I don't always have time to do what I could do, but if I can do 30 minutes, a little bit of stretching, a little bit of strength, get out, have a 20-minute walk, everything goes better. The other one that really worked for me is learning to transition. So when work finishes, and this is hard in healthcare, to close the door and to be 100% present for your family, your friends, those who matter. There's no one right way. And I like to think of this as rhythmic, more like a dance, more like music, rather than a routine or a ritual. A rhythm is emotionally intelligent. You're feeling what you need, but you also know the boundaries. All right, so it's just like learning how to dance really well. I think if you can build this kind of rhythm into your day, you will find your resilience will naturally improve. Mental illness will drop away, fatigue will drop away, your energy will lift, your sense of purpose, of vision, of empathy will lift. So, 2 last thoughts. I guess the first is something we discover in healthcare is quite often professionals in healthcare environments are resentful of the organization, of the system. They get angry, they complain of burnout and stress, and they want the organization to fix it. It's not going to happen, right? So somehow I think as leaders we need to see there's a shared responsibility. Yes, we are lucky people. We had good education. We work in amazing organizations. And I believe we have a duty of self-care. If we're going to care for our patients, we need to be in a good place. If you come into that consulting room angry, frustrated, or sad, depressed, that's a problem for your patients. All right? It's a problem for the quality of care they get and their recovery. So organizations also need to tip in here. And I think to be able to think about, we run a very complex and important part of human community. How can we work as an organization with our people to assess what's going on and to support each other? What does success look like? Well, for us, it's when people have that sense of self-care responsibility, but it's also where the organization makes that more easy. Thinks about when are quiet times, when are high pressure times. Are we training people in recovery, relaxation, resilience, mental health, sleep, for example? And I think there's a question out there, what about our patients? Should we be assessing resilience, physical, emotional, mental? And how might that play into the recovery of a sick person? I think very often, as we know, a high percentage of people who present in primary care settings do not have a physical problem. They have problems in the way they're processing emotion or mind. Right? So I think, in a way, as doctors, we must use the great drugs. We must use our great treatments, our wisdom. But at the same point, I think we can become a force for a kind of compassionate evolution, by setting a good example in ourselves, helping others to evolve, to adjust their emotions, their body, their mind, to have more flow, more bounce, more grow, and more connect. So, in finishing, we like to think of it needs a framework, I think, but, as I said, with the bounce model, put your own language in. I think we all understand good day, bad day, and there are many states between. And you can move fast. For example, in a bipolar disorder, you don't know what to expect. One day, that person is compassionate, driven, visionary, pressure of speech, high energy, risk-taking. And the next day, they're in a mess. It's very difficult to live with. Some of us are more stable. Some of us need to work through our bodies. our world experiences through bodies. My initial training in Africa, really our emotional, mental questionnaires were meaningless. People experienced emotional, mental distress physically. You've got to learn to interpret that. Others of us are more emotional. I feel. Other of us are more cognitive. I think. But I think as humans, this is fairly consistent. There's a movement. Yes, our job as clinicians, as healthcare organizations, is to help people recover from dark places. In addition, I think we could help people grow to new, light, and exciting places. Thank you for your time. I hope you got something to act on. We look forward to seeing you on the website, and do feel free to reach out. Always keen to get the feedback. Thank you. Have a great day.